Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Oh, sorry, let me enlarge my screen. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you again. I hope that you're enjoying a good afternoon. Okay, this is a good Saturday afternoon. It's quite hot over here. Okay, luckily there's no rain, so otherwise my Wi-Fi will be affected. Okay, so I hope today that I'm going to deliver a lesson that you will that makes you understand this difficult concept. Okay, Minion, good afternoon. Jenshuen, good afternoon. Okay, good afternoon to my students here. Ex Potato, good afternoon. Okay, yeah, thanks for joining my class. Okay, like today, I'm going to tackle a difficult topic. Okay, so this is one of the more difficult, or even if not the most difficult topic in the biology of Form 5. Okay, even for KBSM and KSSM. Okay, so it has not changed much from the KSSM, from the KBSM. So all the concepts are pretty much the same. So I always say that if you can do this topic, if you can understand this, if you can remember it well, you can do any topic in the biology syllabus. Okay, because this is one of the hardest ones to understand, number one. Number two, also to remember. Okay, because it's quite complicated. You have all these bombastic names, and you have all these cycle, one hormone affects the other hormone, and so on. So this is where the complication comes in. Okay, so today I hope that after today's lesson, I hope that you will have a clear understanding. And it's always important to understand first, because without understanding, you can't efficiently memorize it or remember it. Okay, so if you just memorize it without understanding it, I do not think that it will stick very much, and it's not going to work. All right, so from understanding is the first step. Otherwise, after that, you have to do some exercises, practice by doing questions, and you will get a very much a better grasp of the whole concept. And I hope that you do well for your questions. Okay, if the questions do come up. All right, okay, so let's get to it. All right, I hope you can hear me well. Okay, Minyin, Jinshuan, can you give me some feedback? Am I clear to you? Okay, let me just share screen now. All right, okay. So I think you can see this, right? I'm looking at it right now. Okay, so I hope I'm clear enough. I'm loud enough. Okay, let's start with this today's menstrual cycle. Okay, as its name suggests, cycle. Whenever you see cycle, like water cycle, carbon dioxide cycle, okay, oxygen cycle, and so on, or nitrogen cycle. So actually, a cycle means that it repeats itself. So after it progresses from the beginning until the end, it's going to repeat itself. So it's all continuous. Okay, so for menstrual cycle, the cycle lasts for 28 days. That is the normal number of days. Okay, all right. Thanks for the feedback, Jenshuen, Minyin, Putri. Yeah, thank you very much for feedback. Adriana. Okay, thanks for your feedback. All right, so this cycle repeats itself. So menstrual cycle is usually 28 days for normal people. But what I mean is not to say normal or not normal. Usually, most people will have 28 days. But of course, it's also quite common to have women who have more longer than 28 days, and also shorter than 28 days. It's quite common. Okay, so it's not a real complication. All right, as long as the ovulation is there every month or every time, every cycle, so it's not a problem actually. Okay, let's go on to the definition of a menstrual cycle. So what is actually a menstrual cycle? What does it involve in your menstrual cycle, which lasts for 28 days? What happens within those 28 days? Okay, so first thing, the menstrual cycle involves two important events. Okay, two things happen there. One is the production of a secondary oocyte. So secondary oocyte is a technical name for the ovum that is already mature, that is ready to be fertilized by the sperm. Okay, so use the correct term. Okay, I know you were in Form 3, you always use the word ovum and so on, right? But in Form 5, I encourage you to use the technical term, which is called secondary oocyte. And that means an ovum that has developed, okay, that is really mature. It is ready to be fertilized by a sperm. Okay, if that happens lah. Okay, so that's the first one. That means the ovum or the secondary oocyte is produced. And number two, Another thing that involved in your menstrual cycle is the thickening of the endometrial wall. The endometrial wall is the lining on the inside of the uterus, which it has a lot of blood vessels. It's highly vascular. That means a lot of blood vessels, a lot of tissues, and so on. And that is important to actually support the growth of the fetus or the zygote, right, or the embryo after fertilization. So these two events actually happen during the menstrual cycle. Okay, so we're going to concentrate on what actually happens from day 1 until day 28. And I hope that you will be able to memorize it. Yeah, because in order to really understand, to do this part questions well, to answer it well, you can't avoid from memorizing. You have to. Okay, in fact, biology a lot involves understanding and then remembering. Okay, now let's go on to the next point. Now, in this cycle, the endometrium, that means the lining, which is a lot of blood vessels, will become soft, thick, and rich with blood vessels in preparation for embryo implantation. So this is after fertilization. When after the ovum is released or the secondary oocyte is released, okay, there will be fertilization, maybe lah. If it happens, then you need a lot of blood vessels there to support the growth of the embryo. Okay, so that happens within your 28 days as well. Okay, your blood vessels, the lining will thicken. Okay, now if fertilization does not take place, okay, which happens for the most of us, okay, who are, many of you are not, many women are not married, okay, and they do not have children, right? So fertilization does not happen. The oocyte, the secondary oocyte will ultimately, it will die, okay, within about 2 days, 1 to 2 days after being released. That means usually on day 14, the ovum is released. After that, about 1 or 2 days later, the oocyte, the secondary oocyte will die. And after that, the endometrial wall will be shed about almost 1 to 2 weeks later. Okay, so that happens within the 28 days. Now, there's one what they call a wrong concept that I find my students will have. Previous classes, previous students so they have that this word menstruation. Okay, they always think that menstruation might have the same meaning as menstrual cycle. Okay, so actually it's different. Menstruation actually means the bleeding, the blood that comes out. Okay, that is not for 28 days. So here I want to correct your misconception. Do not use these two words interchangeably. Menstruation does not mean menstrual cycle. Menstrual cycle does not mean menstruation. For menstruation, it only lasts for 5 days. That means here, this one, we're referring to the events here. This 5 days, that is menstruation, where the girls will have to wear pads and so on, right? Okay, to absorb the blood that is shed. So that is menstruation. But menstrual cycle is actually the whole thing. When you talk about menstrual cycle, it's actually 28 days. Okay, so you can see that menstruation is one part of the menstrual cycle. So do not use these two terms interchangeably. They do not mean the same thing. Okay, the menstrual cycle is the whole thing from day 1 to day 28, and menstruation only refers to the first 5 days, day 1 to day 5. All right, okay, so I hope you're clear on this, and do not use these two words interchangeably to mean the same thing. They do not mean the same thing. All right, okay, so I think there are no questions here. All right, I'll proceed. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So we're just barely scratching the surface. We just see what is menstrual cycle. Right now, as you remember in your chapter, your Form 4, right? Some of you are Form 5, you are revising this, is okay. Form 4, chapter 12, you also learn about hormones. So the menstrual cycle is very closely related to your hormones. It is because of the hormones that your menstrual cycle runs. Okay, so basically, if you do not have certain hormones, they are not produced anymore in your pituitary gland, actually your menstrual cycle will stop. So these two important hormones, okay, that come from the pituitary gland are these two. They're called gonadotropins. I'm sure you remember your FSH and your LH. FSH is follicle-stimulating hormone. LH is luteinizing hormone. Okay, these two hormones come from the anterior pituitary gland, and they also actually have effect on both males and females. Okay, we have seen in our previous lesson on gametogenesis, on spermatogenesis. You see that FSH and LH also helps in the production of sperms. Okay, so do not think that FSH and LH are just female hormones. They are not. Female hormones are the estrogen and progesterone. Okay, they do not come from the pituitary gland. It is these two, FSH and LH, that come from the pituitary gland. So it's very important that you understand these two hormones must come first from the pituitary gland, and then only your estrogen and progesterone will be produced. Okay, so you need to remember at least these four important hormones. Two from the pituitary gland. Okay, the anterior pituitary gland. All right, now let's go on to the next one. So the function of hormones. So like I mentioned just now earlier, menstrual cycle is closely tied to the release of hormones. Without these hormones, your menstrual cycle actually doesn't run. Okay, so the fact that you have your monthly period and so on is because you have these hormones in your body. Okay, let's look at the first two, which is the FSH and LH, which come from the pituitary gland. Okay, so let's look at the function. FSH, as the name suggests, follicle, okay, stimulating hormone. That means this hormone stimulates the follicles to grow. Okay, follicles are those, little holes, in the ovary, which will form much earlier. Okay, when the baby is still in the mother's womb, you already have all these little potential oocytes, okay, or ovums that can be released later. So these little holes, they are actually called follicles. Okay, now let's look at this. FSH, number one, stimulates follicle growth in the ovary. So with the FSH, which is released from the anterior pituitary gland, this FSH will be released into the blood, and the blood carries it to the ovary. And when it comes to the ovary, it will stimulate the follicles to grow. So the follicles will start growing from day 1, day 2, day 3, and the follicle will become bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, and the oval, or we call it oocyte inside there, will also become more mature. Okay, as it go on to day 14. So from day 1 to day 14, these follicles will start growing under the influence of FSH. Okay, now, so besides that, FSH also helps to stimulate the release of estrogen. Now, this is the other female hormone I mentioned, the female hormone. This estrogen actually comes from the follicle cells. So with the follicle growing, when a follicle starts to become more and more mature, the follicle cells will also start to mature, and they will produce the estrogen. So remember, the estrogen actually comes from the follicle cells inside the ovary. So when follicle grows, okay, so does the estrogen. It will be released. Estrogen will be released. Okay. Now let's look at the luteinizing hormone. This is another hormone produced by the pituitary gland. And basically, usually on the 14th day or day 14, the luteinizing hormone will be at the highest level. That means the most. At the most, the concentration will be the highest on the 14th day. Okay. Now let's see the effect. Luteinizing hormone stimulates ovulation. Okay, ovulation is the release of the secondary oocyte from the follicle that is already mature. Okay, just like I mentioned, remember I mentioned day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, the follicle will start to grow, right? It will become bigger and bigger and bigger, and the oocyte inside will become more and more mature. So this starts from day 1 until day 14, and until day 14, on day 14, the follicle will become so mature, it's called the Graafian follicle. It will release the secondary oocyte. And that event is called ovulation. And that happens when luteinizing hormone is at the highest. That is on the day 14. All right, okay? Now let's go on. It also causes the formation of corpus luteum. Okay, corpus luteum is what happens to the Graafian follicle, the follicle that's already released the ovum. It will become what we call a tissue there called the corpus luteum. And it's important because it will later on produce another hormone. Okay, we'll see that later. And also besides, this is the one, the corpus luteum actually stimulates the corpus luteum actually releases this progesterone. Okay, so you can see that all these hormones are interlinked. Because you have this hormone will come out. And because you have this thing happening, then this will happen. So they're all interrelated. Without A, there's no B. Without B, there's no C. Okay, so afterwards you see, I will go into detail and you'll see the relationship, how it works. So you need to remember the relationship. Okay, when you have this happens, it makes it easier for you to remember. Yeah, because you understand how it works. The problem why you cannot remember, why you cannot memorize this part is because you don't understand how it works. Once you understand how it works, then it makes it very easy for you to remember. Okay, let me go on to the next two hormones. These are called the gonadotropin, FSH and LH. These two must be released first before you have the other two called estrogen and progesterone. Okay, so these two is pituitary gland releases it. The other two, the estrogen and progesterone, actually comes from the ovary. All right, okay, so make it clear to you. FSH and LH is from the pituitary gland, but estrogen and progesterone comes from the ovary, because the ovary at that time, the follicles are already mature, and when it's mature, it will produce the estrogen. Okay, now see what's the effect of estrogen. What does estrogen do to your menstrual cycle? Okay, how does it control your menstrual cycle? Okay, number one, it repairs and stimulates the thickening of endometrium, the blood, the lining of the blood and all that, the tissues there. Why do I say repair? Because you see, when the menstruation is over from day 1 to day 5, the lining will be shed, isn't it, during menstruation? So the blood is discharged from the uterine lining. Then the thickness at that time around day 5 will be the thinnest, okay, because the blood has been taken out, right? So now estrogen, once it's released by the ovary, it affects the lining. It is going to repair the lining. So the lining will become thicker and thicker and thicker under the influence of estrogen. So it's going to repair back, okay? Because you cannot have the lining too thin. Otherwise, if you do not repair it, later on when ovulation happens, when fertilization happens, there's no place, the embryo will not be able to be implanted there. That means the baby will not survive. Okay, it will be a miscarriage. So you need to repair the lining after menstruation is over. Okay, so that is the effect of estrogen. It repairs and makes the lining thicker. Okay, repair back. Okay, next, stimulates the follicle growth. Okay, so estrogen also stimulates the follicle to grow as well. Okay, to besides your FSH, all right. So your estrogen also helps the follicle to grow. Okay, next, it also really stimulates the release of FSH and LH. It has another effect. So estrogen also affects the FSH and LH. Okay, afterwards we will see the actual relationship. Whether estrogen is high or low concentration, it will also affect the FSH and LH. Okay, we will see that in detail later on. Don't worry. Okay, I'll guide you step by step. Okay, next, progesterone. Now, progesterone, I just want to make you remember this very important fact. For pregnant women, progesterone is the hormone that you must have. Okay, progesterone is very important to pregnant women because without progesterone, the blood, you remember the blood, the endometrium, all right, the endometrium lining, the lining there, it will break down. And then when it breaks down, that means there's going to be a threatened miscarriage. It's going to be a sort of like what you call a miscarriage. All right. So progesterone actually helps to maintain the thickness of the endometrium. Okay, so stimulates the thickening. Okay, first it stimulates also, and it also helps to maintain it. Okay, making the endometrium thick, folded, highly vascular. That means rich in blood vessels. This is to prepare for implantation of the embryo. Okay, if that ever happens lah, right? If there is fertilization. Okay, and then there's another effect of progesterone. When progesterone level is high, okay, that means it's a lot of progesterone. Usually happens when a woman is pregnant. She will have a lot of progesterone in her blood. It will stop the release of FSH and LH. So you understand the idea. When a woman is already pregnant, you notice that she will not have any more production of ovum. For the 9 months that she's carrying the baby, she will not make any more new eggs. Okay, basically what it means is there's no more oocyte to be released every month. The reason is because of this. Progesterone actually stops or inhibits. Inhibit means prevents the release of FSH and LH. So when progesterone is high, that means when the woman is pregnant, there will be no FSH. There'll be very low FSH. There's very low LH. That means there is no more production, maturation. The follicle will not grow anymore. That means there will be no new eggs lah. All right. So it makes a lot of sense. Again, like I mentioned, you understand how the hormone works. You can explain why. Okay, you can explain why a pregnant woman will not be having any more eggs for the 9 months that she's pregnant. Then this is your reason. Once you understand the concept, you can remember it and you can answer even questions that are kebat. Okay, so the understanding is very important, and that's what I'm trying to do here, to make you understand first. Okay, let's go on. Right. Now, so this is a cross section of the ovary that shows the stages of where the follicle, how the follicle grows. You will see in the beginning here, all right, here, primordial follicle means it's the beginning. You will see the follicle size is smallest. This is what you have in your ovaries now, even then, all right, in my ovaries, in your ovaries, all right, this is what you get when the baby is born, the baby girl is born. You have all these primordial follicle which are not ready to be developed yet. It only becomes developed when there is FSH to be released every month. So in your ovaries right now, you have a lot of these primordial follicles, which can number up to about, I think, up to about 400,000, 300, 400,000 potential follicles, okay, or the oocytes that can develop. So here, primary follicle, all right, every month, one of these primordial follicles will be chosen, will be selected to undergo the complete change to be released as an ovum or the secondary oocyte. So you see, under the influence of FSH, you see it becomes bigger, right? You see that's why the follicle grows, and then you get the tertiary follicle, right? It becomes bigger until it becomes a mature follicle called Graafian follicle. Okay, Graafian, Graafian, Graafian follicle. And then this Graafian follicle will move, progress to the outside of this, try to move, to merge the lining, merge with the membrane of this ovary. And you can see here, it releases the ovum. That typically happens on day 14. Okay, and after that, this whole group of this what you call Graafian follicle will become the corpus luteum. So it develops into corpus luteum, and this is the corpus luteum that is the tissue there. It actually produces progesterone. And after a certain number of days, okay, usually about 7 days, when there is no fertilization, this corpus luteum will start to break down. It will degenerate, okay? Degenerate, and it forms corpus albicans. You don't need to remember this term in your SPM biology KSSM. You just need to remember corpus luteum. The corpus albicans is like the corpus luteum that has degenerated, and it will stop producing the progesterone. Okay, so these are the events that happen. All right, you can see the cross section here. You can see the different sizes of the follicle as they grow, progresses from day 1 to day 28. So day 1 is here, all right, and day 28 is somewhere here where the cycle repeats itself. And the next month, you have the same events happening again. Okay, so this is what happens during the menstrual cycle. All right, okay, now let's go on. Let's look at this graph. You also need to memorize this graph. Which line represents what hormone? Okay, now don't think it's difficult to remember. I will tell you a way how to remember this. Okay, all right. So hormone levels, you need to remember the two hormones lah. Two that comes from the pituitary gland, which is your FSH and LH. The other two is estrogen and progesterone, which are released by the ovary. Okay, so the estrogen and progesterone is also because of these FSH and the follicle growth and so on. So now let's look at the events. Right, day 1 to day 28. We look at one by one. The lines or the levels of the hormones, they change from day 1 to day 28. Okay, the level goes up and down, up and down. Now, how to remember? Okay, don't worry. If I give you a question like this with 4 lines, how to identify which line refers to what hormone? Okay, of course, in the question you don't have this. You will not be given these names, right? Let's say you are asked to identify which line represents what hormone. Okay, if you do not memorize it, you do not understand it, you will not know which line is which line. Okay, so first thing to remember, look at the first peak. From day 1 to day 14, which is the hormone that reaches the highest? You will see that it is this one. All right, this is the hormone. It usually happens 1 day or 2 days before ovulation. Ovulation is day 14. Always remember that. So the first hormone that reaches its peak just 2 days before ovulation, just 2 days before day 14, day 14, this is the estrogen. Okay, that is day 12. Day 12, estrogen reaches its highest concentration. So from there, you will know, okay, that must be estrogen. And there's another indication. Look at towards the end, around day 21, your estrogen becomes high again, although not as high as the day 12. So remember, it peaks twice. Actually, once is the day 12. After that, it goes down, and then it goes up again around day 21 to day 23, like that. Okay, it also goes up. That is estrogen. Okay, second one, the second line. Look at the blue line, the light blue line. Okay, this one here. This is the LH. Okay, why? Because LH peaks on day 14. This is ovulation. This is LH. Because LH function, as you remember, is to induce ovulation. When LH is high, that means on day 14, ovulation will happen. The Graafian follicle ruptures and the ovum is released. So that must be LH. And this LH is the higher one, not the lower one. You will see there's another peak here, isn't it? You can see there's another peak here, the lower one. Also highest at day 14, but that is not LH, that is FSH. Okay, so how to identify your LH and FSH? Very easy. You look at day 14, the highest one is LH, the lower peak is the FSH. And then you can see throughout the entire cycle, LH and FSH is the highest at this time, day 14. For the entire time, it's always low. You see the luteinizing hormone after this, you can see is very low. And in the beginning, it's also low. So it never peaks again. Okay, FSH and LH, it doesn't peak again. It only peaks on day 14. So that's how you can identify. Simple. It's actually simple. Okay, one more hormone to handle. That is the progesterone. The progesterone actually happens or is released by the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is what you get after the Graafian follicle releases the ovum. That means it has to be after day 14. The progesterone level will be the highest after day 14, usually around 20 something. Okay, this is where your corpus luteum is fully developed, and the corpus luteum is the one that releases progesterone. Okay, so now here I've already given you a method how to identify the 4 lines. Okay, in the question they will not give you the lines. I mean, they will give the lines, but they will not give the names. Or they ask you to draw. Okay, when you draw, you should know where it peaks. FSH, LH on day 14. LH higher than FSH. And estrogen just 2 days before ovulation around day 12. And after that, it comes up again towards the end. And progesterone is always low in the beginning, and it only peaks around day 21 onwards. Okay, very simple. All right, now let's look at the follicle development. So the follicles that are in the ovary, they change size. All right, okay. Cikgu Salasia, thank you for joining my class. Cikgu Salasia. All right, now follicle development, you can see very clearly that the follicle grows. Okay, you can see the follicle size. This is usually day 1 now. I won't say it's day 0. So the primary follicle, you can see the size is the smallest. Then as you progress from day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, until day 14, this is where ovulation happens, you find the size develops. You see, this one much bigger, the follicle much bigger, and this is called almost the mature one already. It's called the secondary oocyte. Okay, so you see the follicle grows because of what hormone? Because of FSH. Because FSH is follicle-stimulating hormone. It stimulates the follicle to grow. Okay, it's very easy to remember, and it's very easy for you to remember because you already understand. Okay, then after that, after ovulation, you see that this tissues here, all right, the Graafian follicle, it develops into corpus luteum. The corpus luteum will produce progesterone. That's why progesterone will be high after ovulation. And then when there's no fertilization, the corpus luteum will start to degenerate. It will start to break down. You see smaller and smaller. See the size getting smaller and smaller? And towards here, the progesterone will be very little. When the progesterone is very little, that means it cannot support the endometrium anymore. The endometrium will start to break down because progesterone maintains the lining. When there's no progesterone, the lining will not maintain. That means it will start to break down. And you will have your next period. You see? Okay, so this, once you understand it, you can see the relationship. You can remember it very well. Okay, now next one. Let's look at the relationship between the follicle development, the size of the developments, and the changes in the endometrium lining, plus the level of hormone. Okay, you can bring them together now. Okay, just now we saw one by one separately. Now we correlate everything together. You can see here, from day 1 to day 5, menses means it's a short form for your menstruation. You see the lining breaks down. Okay, you see the thickness? It comes down, isn't it? The thickness. So it becomes thinner and thinner and thinner until day 15 is the thinness. Then you see the lining grows up, becomes thicker because you have estrogen. This is estrogen. Estrogen here should be OE, the spelling. E is American spelling. British spelling is OE. So here you see, because estrogen is rising, you can see the blue line. The blue line represents estrogen. When there's estrogen, the endometrium lining will become thicker. I can see the relationship there, right? You can see that. So it goes up higher and higher, so does your lining. And okay, and here you find that the follicles are developing. Why? Because you have FSH. And this one actually produces your estrogen. It is this follicle cells that produces estrogen. And estrogen rises until day 12. Okay, after that you have ovulation. Then your Graafian follicle will change to become corpus luteum, and corpus luteum produces progesterone. So you can see the progesterone is high at this time, and the lining becomes thick because it is the job of the progesterone to maintain the lining. Okay, so after that, you can see the lining is thick. Lining is the progesterone level is high. The lining is very thick. And then after that, after a certain number of days, when the body senses there's no fertilization, okay, there's no fertilization, this corpus luteum will start to break down. So it will start to shrink. When it starts to shrink, that means there will be less progesterone. Progesterone will fall. Progesterone will drop. So when progesterone drops, you notice that later on, this blood lining will be shed. It will break down. And then you have the next period cycle will start all over again. Okay, so you can see the relationship here. We put them together. Okay, now I'm not finished yet. All right, I'm not finished yet. I want to give you a better idea. We'll go step by step because you may need to write an essay. By looking at this, you can't write an essay because you don't have the notes. You don't have the points. So I'm going to give you the notes. All right, slowly you explain the events step by step and the words to explain it. Okay, let's look at the next one. Here, okay, this is I just want to show you the corpus luteum, the relationship between corpus luteum and the progesterone level. When corpus luteum is there, progesterone will be there. And when progesterone is there, the endometrium lining will be thick. Okay, after that it breaks down because the corpus luteum breaks down, okay, degenerates. Okay, now we come to the main important parts. How are we going to write an essay to explain all the events from day 0? In fact, actually, day 0 means the period has not started yet. When you talk about day 1, that is the first day of menstruation. I mean, the day that's when it starts to break down. So day 0 means it's preparing to break down, not yet. All right, so day 0. So let's look at this. We look at the whole thing, but we break it up to parts. So 0 to 5 first. Now, 0 to 5, at the beginning of the menstrual cycle, so we look at the beginning now, the level of hormones is low, okay? Because this hormone, you can see here, here, FSH is low, the LH is also low, estrogen is low, progesterone is low, everything is low, right? Because at this time, your corpus luteum, before that, the corpus luteum already breaks down. So your estrogen and progesterone will be low. So your endometrium lining will not be able to be maintained. That's why your menstruation will start. Okay, so remember at the beginning, everything is low. Your FSH, your LH, the estrogen, and progesterone, everything is at its lowest. So that's why the menstruation begins. You have 5 days of menstruation. All right, okay. Now, after that, one day before menstruation starts, one day, that means menstruation starts on day 1. So one day before, actually the hypothalamus will start to release this gonadotrophin-releasing hormone. So GnRH. Now this one comes from the hypothalamus. So just like I mentioned, you have FSH and LH that come from pituitary, right? So before this FSH and LH can be released, it needs something to stimulate also. The GnRH from the hypothalamus must be released first, and this will stimulate the pituitary gland to release the FSH and LH. So that means even though we say the pituitary gland is the master gland, it also has a master. The master is actually the hypothalamus. Okay, so the hypothalamus releases the GnRH, and then only then the anterior pituitary gland will produce the FSH and LH. Okay, so here GnRH stimulates the pituitary gland to release the follicle-stimulating hormone, that is FSH, and luteinizing hormone LH into the blood. That means without the GnRH, there will be no FSH and there's no LH. Okay, so you see the master, even though we say that pituitary gland is the master, there is something to also stimulate the production. So there's something, you need to have the GnRH first before your FSH and LH is produced. Okay, so now this is the beginning, the first 5. I have not finished this part yet. Let's continue the next slide. So now, so you can see here, with the influence of FSH, you can see the follicle start to grow. So your FSH is starting to rise here slowly, right? Slowly. So at the beginning here, your FSH will be released. So, and you can see that FSH stimulates the growth of follicle. That's why your follicle starts to grow from day 1 to maybe day 14, right? Slowly it goes to day 14. Now, this is not the ovum for that cycle. The ovum from the previous cycle already released. That cell is already dead. This is for this month. This month, another ovum is being produced. Okay, let's go on. Right, I think there's no questions here. Okay, right, quite clear, I think, if you follow. Okay, now we go to day 6. So your menstruation is over. All right, day 1 to day 5, the bleeding has stopped. All right, now we look at day 6 to day 10. The follicle still continues to grow because there is FSH. FSH stimulates the growth of follicles. So it starts to become bigger and bigger and bigger. And the ovum here will become from primary oocyte, become secondary oocyte later. Okay, let's look at this. Then the FSH stimulates follicle growth. So you can see the follicle starts to become bigger, right? Within the primary follicle, the oocyte grows to become secondary follicle. So from primary follicle, it becomes secondary follicle, and just before day 14, it's already mature. This is the secondary oocyte. Okay, I just want to make it a little bit bigger for you to see this. Right, zoom in. You can see this picture. All right. Okay, you can see here, this shows the size. I cannot write when I'm zooming in. Okay, so you see the follicle grows because FSH is being released. A little bit higher, you can see the FSH increases. FSH increases, so does the size of the follicle. All right, okay, now let's go back. Next slide. Okay, there you can see it. Now, growing follicles in turn will release estrogen. So remember we said that estrogen actually comes from the follicles. So when the follicle grows, the estrogen will be released. And this is the reason why you see the estrogen increasing. Okay, so estrogen will encourage the follicle to mature and also repairing the endometrium wall. So you can see now very clearly. All right, let me again zoom in. All right, here. Wait, where is it? Sorry. All right. Here. So you can see the estrogen rises. Estrogen rises. You see the green, yellow line here, and that will actually cause the endometrium lining to repair back because your estrogen become more and more. Right? Estrogen becomes more and more because of this. It comes from here. The follicle is mature, so it releases more and more estrogen. So from day 6 onwards to day 10, your estrogen rises. And when that rises, the lining also thickens. Okay, now let's go back. All right, so next line. Now, at this moment, even though we say the estrogen is rising, it's still considered low levels. Okay, it hasn't reached a certain peak yet. So estrogen is still rising, but it's still considered low because this level of estrogen at this time, from 6 to 10, actually inhibit the release of FSH and LH. This is through a negative feedback mechanism. So when there's low estrogen, your FSH and LH will be kept low. Okay, so estrogen is low, your LH and FSH will be low. Now, why you need it to be low? Because if the FSH and LH becomes high, it will stimulate more ovums to be released. It will make new follicles uh, grow. That means you may have more than one egg released at the end. Okay, that means at the moment, usually for humans, it's common to have just one egg to be released every month. If your hormone goes haywire, okay, if you have more FSH and LH at this time from day 6 to day 10, you may have more than one follicle developing. So if you have more than one follicle developing, you may release 2 or 3 or 4 eggs, right? And then you may have, twins, triplets, and so on. Okay, so usually at this time, for the normal scenario, usually there's only one egg that should develop lah. Okay, so this is an evolutionary adaptation. People say, scientists have said that, why do humans only have one child at one time? Why not like dogs? Dogs, they give birth to what, 7, 8 babies at one time. Cats also, isn't it? 7, 8 babies at one time. Why humans have only the ability usually just to have one? Okay, maybe this is an evolutionary development, is so that we can look after the baby. The baby that's inside here will get all the nutrients that it needs. It doesn't need to share with another baby. So we can give it all the nutrients and all the best, the certain things that the baby needs, and it can grow healthily. But for animals who have many babies at one time, you can see that sometimes they do not develop, or will not be born alive. And even then, after that, the next few days, maybe some will die off. Okay, because they're not healthy. Because they have to share the nutrients. A mother has to share all these nutrients with so many babies. So each baby will not get enough nutrients. So this is additional information from you. This is what I learned from my documentaries when I watch documentaries. This is an evolutionary kind of adaptation. Okay, so that humans can give all the best attention to just one baby, and that baby can grow healthily in the mother's womb. Okay, so now at this time it's still low level. All right, okay, so it will prevent the growth of new follicles. All right, now let's go on to let's go back first. Now, so at day 10 now is still considered low, and now we go on to day 10 onwards. 11. All right, now day 11, what happens? Suddenly something happens at day 11 to 14. You can see the hormone levels will change. It rises. Now, first of all, which one rises? It is the estrogen. Okay, now estrogen rises because why estrogen rises? If you can understand, the estrogen comes from follicles. So at this time, the follicle is mature already. The follicles are producing a lot of estrogen. So now the estrogen suddenly rises and becomes the highest. Peaks means become the highest on day 12. So usually you will see that day 12, you see this arrow here pointing to this peak. Okay, so today's lesson may be a bit longer, but doesn't matter. I want you to really understand. I'm taking great pains to actually go through this lesson with you. You can see here, right? See, it peaks on day 14. And this is because your follicle is now matured, and it produces a lot of estrogen. So now you have high concentration of estrogen. Okay, high concentration of estrogen. Now, so this has an opposite effect. This will actually stimulate the hypothalamus to produce GnRH. This is a positive feedback. That means the more estrogen you have, it's going to have a positive effect. It will make the GnRH to be released. And GnRH will stimulate FSH and LH to be produced. Okay, you can see here, your high level of GnRH then stimulates the pituitary gland to secrete even more FSH and LH. So you can see here now, suddenly on day 12 onwards, your FSH will peak, right? Will go higher, and your LH will also go higher. Therefore, you will see that on day 14, the FSH and LH is at the highest concentration. Okay, this is the reason why. Okay, because GnRH is released. Okay, because of positive feedback from the high levels of estrogen. Okay, so LH level rises until it peaks on day 14. Sorry, not 13. Day 14. So I gotta change this. Sorry, I mistake here. Day 14, leading to ovulation. Okay, and release of a secondary oocyte from Graafian follicle on day 14. Okay, it's also possible for you to put 30, maybe one day before. Okay, so now, but definitely when you want to say or release of secondary oocyte, you have to say day 14. Okay, so it peaks on maybe day 13, like that also can. It leads to ovulation on the day 14. So that's why your LH is the highest on day 14. Okay, next. There you can see that the peaks are all there, and ovulation happens there. All right. Now at the same time, right, when LH also will stimulate the follicular tissues to change into corpus luteum. So once the Graafian follicle releases the ovum, the secondary oocyte, the LH will make this Graafian follicle change to become corpus luteum. All right. Okay. So we're done at halfway already. Halfway at day 14. Okay. Let's carry on. There you see that is the Graafian follicle. Okay, you can see here. I just maybe zoom in on this part here. You can see clearly. Zoom in here. Right. Okay, you can see here. This is already corpus luteum. All right. Now next, Now let's go on to what happens after ovulation from day 15 to day 21. That's the third week. Okay. What happens? You find that you have LH, right? It will stimulate the corpus luteum. Now the corpus luteum will be there. It will be secreting estrogen and progesterone. So these hormones will rise. Now that's the reason why it rises. You see, it rises after ovulation. You see your progesterone here, progesterone, and here the estrogen. It rises after day 14. It's because corpus luteum is there. Corpus luteum corpus luteum secretes the estrogen and progesterone. Okay, there you can see it rises. Okay, next, right. The combination of estrogen and progesterone, okay, will inhibit the release of FSH and LH from the hypothalamus via negative feedback mechanism. Now, when estrogen and progesterone is high, that means at this time, 15 to 21, around that time, your estrogen and progesterone is high, it will have a negative feedback on the hypothalamus. That means it will stop the hypothalamus from releasing, it will stop the anterior pituitary gland from releasing the FSH and LH. So you can see when the estrogen and progesterone is high, your FSH and LH is low because it stops it. Right? Why is it important to stop it? Okay, K-Bart question. Why is it important to stop your release of FSH and LH? Because if you have FSH and LH, it will promote the development of another follicle. That means you're going to have a new egg produced when you have FSH and LH. So we do not want that to happen because you have just released an egg, right, which is could be fertilized. And then don't tell me you want to have more eggs released. Okay, you want to concentrate on just that egg first and give it the best opportunity for it to develop and fertilize. So you do not want to have new growth of the follicles, new growth of some more eggs, because you're still within that 1 month. Okay, you just want to develop one egg. You do not want to develop so many eggs, right? So that will stop new growth of new follicles. Okay, you can see the relationship, right? It's easy to remember once that. So progesterone is high, estrogen is high, your FSH and LH will be low because it's a negative feedback mechanism. Okay, so you can see here, my red arrow shows the FSH and LH low here. All right, so now the progesterone has the effect of maintaining the vascular tissues there, that means the blood vessels there. All right, so the endometrial lining, the endometrial wall will become thicker. So progesterone, actually, like I mentioned, this is very important for pregnant women. If you're pregnant, right, you need your progesterone because you need to maintain the thickness of the the blood there, right? The endometrial lining. So enriching it with blood vessels in preparation for embryo implantation in case fertilization takes place. So you need to have the lining already ready. So this lining around the thickness here is about 5 mm. Okay, about half a cm thickness. Okay, that is about the thickness of the endometrial lining. Okay, so it's in preparation of in case there's fertilization there. All right, so we're up to down to this 21 already. Yeah, so let's go on to the last week. Okay, now you can see the lining thickens. All right, the lining thickens here. Okay, now we go to the last week of the menstrual cycle. So what happens during this time? Now during this time, if there's no fertilization, the corpus luteum will start to degenerate. It will break down. Okay, because somehow when there's time frame, the body will sense that, okay, nothing happens here. All right, it's time for the corpus luteum to break down. Okay, and when this happens, it will stop the production of estrogen and progesterone. It will slow down. All right, the production of estrogen and progesterone will drop. So when these this you call this the corpus luteum breaks down, the level of progesterone and estrogen will drop. You can see it very clearly here. Okay, so I'll draw, I think I've got the circle here. Yeah, okay, so that breaks down. And you can see the level drops. Okay, it makes a lot of sense. And then, so without the stimulation from estrogen and progesterone, so now your estrogen and progesterone is very low. When it's very low, your endometrium will not be able to be maintained. The blood lining will start to break down. The blood vessels will break there. The endometrium will be shed. All right, and then you have your starting of your menstruation for the next month. So you see, it makes sense. Towards the end of your menstrual cycle, around almost 26, 7, 8, like that, the hormone, the level of your hormone, progesterone and estrogen will be dropping, and that will make that this lining, it cannot maintain your endometrial lining. Therefore, it will start to break down, and therefore you have your menstruation will start for the next, day one. All right, okay, you can see it's starting to shrink, right? Starting to shrink. Now, low levels of estrogen and progesterone. Now the estrogen and progesterone is low, right? It will no longer inhibit the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. So when this progesterone is low and progesterone, it will not inhibit. So your FSH and LH will have a chance to be released again. So it's the starting of the next cycle. Okay, the next cycle, when FSH comes up, increases, you have the production of another egg. All right, okay, so GnRH is secreted again. So you have GnRH because it doesn't have any more effect of inhibition from the estrogen and progesterone. So your GnRH is secreted again. Then this will stimulate your FSH and LH now. So now your FSH and LH will start to be released, and therefore you will have new growth of follicle. That is for the next cycle. All right, so you see when this one drops, this one will increase. So you can see this is very logical logical explanation why these things happen. So without understanding this, you cannot memorize it. So you have to understand first. Okay, so now let's look at the whole thing. Now that is if no fertilization. But what happens if there is fertilization? If there is the sperm happens to be in the female reproductive system at this time, what happens? All right, there will be fertilization. So the corpus luteum will not break down. Once there is fertilization, corpus luteum here, all right, you can see this corpus luteum here, it will not break down. You will find that it will remain there. It will remain there because it will continue to secrete progesterone and estrogen, which is very, very important to maintain the lining of the endometrium. Okay, so you can see that it will not break down, right? This will cause the endometrial wall to continually thicken. So it becomes thicker and thicker in order to support the growth of fetus. Okay, and it will remain there for the next 3 to 4 months. Your corpus luteum will be producing progesterone and estrogen for the next 3 to 4 months. Okay, after that, this function of producing progesterone will be taken over by the placenta. By that time, the placenta is already mature. Okay, the placenta will start to grow, right? Start to grow in the beginning. Maybe once it starts to implantation, placenta will grow, but it's not mature yet. It is not able to produce the progesterone. It still has to rely on the corpus luteum. But after the month of 3 or 4, the placenta is fully grown, fully matured, it will produce the progesterone now. Okay? Now, let's look at the role of hormone in pregnancy and miscarriage. Miscarriage is a failed pregnancy. That means the baby cannot survive inside there. The what do you call that? The baby, all right, is possible to be shed as menstrual cycle. All right, okay. Okay, how does hormonal changes affect the mood? Yeah, okay, this one is in the what do you call, a lot of this premenstrual syndrome and so on. It does affect, although I'm not too sure how it affects the mood. Yeah, it's a good question, Amiro, right? Maybe I need to Google this up because so far I've not actually thought about it before. The hormonal changes, it does affect the mood, yes. You can see that's why you will have the premenstrual syndrome. Okay, I'll go into that later. So let's look at the role of hormone. Corpus luteum will continue to produce progesterone and progesterone up to 3 to 4 months after pregnancy. That's what I mentioned earlier. Okay. Then after 3 to 4 months, the corpus luteum will degenerate. Okay. No more. You don't need the corpus luteum anymore because the production of the hormones will be taken over by the placenta until the baby is born. Okay. The placenta is a very huge tissue or organ. Okay. Tissue, I think. Yeah. Then this progesterone inhibits, right now. So when the mother is pregnant, she will have a lot of progesterone. The progesterone will stop the secretion of FSH and LH. Like I mentioned earlier, you will not have any more production of eggs when the mother is still pregnant. There is no ovulation. There is no period also. Okay, no menstrual cycle because that normal sequence of changes, it doesn't happen because all you have now is your endometrium lining, which is supported by the progesterone. All you need to do is to maintain the baby inside there. Okay, so that is the main function already now. The uterus wants to support the baby and give it the best nutrient to the baby it grows inside. Okay, it does not go through the normal cycle anymore of the menstrual cycle. Okay, so everything stops for the 9 months, okay, while the mother is still carrying the baby. And imbalance of progesterone and estrogen levels, sometimes it's genetic, right? Sometimes it could be other factors, lack of nutrients as well, right? It may lead to miscarriage. A miscarriage is a failed pregnancy because mainly is due to the decrease of progesterone level, not enough progesterone, which causes the uterus to shrink and the endometrium lining to break down. So you will see things like this. Okay, start bleeding. So one of the signs of an early miscarriage is bleeding. Bleeding when the mother, notices that she is bleeding, like she's having a period, which is a bad sign for pregnancy. So quickly go to see a doctor. The doctor will try to rescue the baby. All right, maybe have to have injections, hormone injections. Okay, it's starting to rain here. So, all right, okay. Now let's look at one more thing. The feedback mechanism of hormones in the menstrual cycle. Earlier, you say estrogen, when it's low, all right, it will have a negative feedback mechanism. After that, the estrogen will rise and that will have a positive feedback mechanism. So I want to explain this. Now, you see the role of hypothalamus and the pituitary gland and the ovary and so on. Hypothalamus produces GnRH, and that in turn stimulates your pituitary gland to produce the two important hormones. What is that? The FSH and LH. And these two will be carried to the ovary through the blood. It makes the follicle become mature, and that releases estrogen, right? Follicles will grow, that produces estrogen, and estrogen makes the endometrial lining to thicken, and it affects the uterus. Okay, so this is a sequence of events that, you can see the relationship between one and the other. All right, and then now you have, for the most time, from day 1 to day 28, usually estrogen will have a negative feedback on the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. When there's estrogen, it will stop the production of LH and FSH because you do not want to have more eggs produced, isn't it, at that time? But only at certain time, day 12 to day 14, when the estrogen is at high levels, it will have a positive feedback. That means when estrogen is high, level of estrogen is high at around day 12, this has a positive feedback on the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. It will increase the production of GnRH, and it will also increase the secretion of LH and FSH. So that's why day 14, your LH and FSH will rise because of estrogen being at the peak on day 14, on day 12. Okay, so estrogen at this time, only these two times, only this time, day 12 to day 14, it has a positive feedback. For other times, it's just negative feedback. It stops the LH and FSH from being produced. Okay, because you do not want to have so many eggs, right? Okay, now let's go on to premenstrual syndrome. Okay, you see that some girls, not everybody, yeah, in fact, I'm telling you, it's not same for everybody. Some will have premenstrual syndrome, some practically don't have that. Okay, it's different. It differs from people to people. So what are these premenstrual syndrome? They are symptoms that appear just before menstrual cycle. It's up to 1 to 2 weeks before the menstruation comes. Menstruation cycle, menstruation begins. It's about 1 to 2 weeks before. It is because of imbalance of progesterone and hormone, estrogen and progesterone levels. Okay, imbalance. Okay, so these are the symptoms that will have, right? Like Amiro was asking, Amiro, yeah, yeah, somebody's, yeah, that's why they always troll girls. Girls will always, like, very, very irritated, very, very easily get angry at that time. You say, you're having your period, somebody's on the bed. Actually, it's wrong, not having period, not yet having period, coming. The period is coming. You don't say someone's having a period, because when someone is having their period, it is no longer premenstrual syndrome. All right, it is actually pre means before. Means the period about to come, not when the period, somebody is having the period. Okay, so this is a wrong conception, misconception there. Fatigue, feel tired, all right, feel headache, all right. If these are the symptoms, breast will feel sore and tender. That means it feels like a bit hardened, all right, a bit keras, and it feels painful, to the touch. Okay, because of hormonal, hormones, this hormones actually affect that. And AIDS. Right? Now, the words in blue here shows physiological changes. That means the effect. Physiology means body lah, right? All right. Acne is pimple. You may have overproduction of sebum, so you'll find there's acne. All right. Stomach cramps. These are physiological effects, changes. And the one in red, this is emotional. This is mental, emotional, psychological. Bad temper, irritable means very easily irritated. Everything also makes you angry. All right, there's bad temper, irritable. Then anxiety, feeling stress, you feel anxiety, means anxious, very, very kanjiong, like Chinese we say kanjiong. Then you feel emotional instability, all right, sometimes happy, sometimes sad, Okay, but not everybody feels that. Personally, I don't feel that. Okay, so this is premenstrual syndrome. Now, how it affects the mood. So Amiro, I'm so sorry, I'm not able to answer to you now. I may have to look up on that. All right, I will have to Google and see lah. I have not really thought of how actually the hormones affects the your psychological. It does, but I do not know how to explain that. Okay, so let's look at the last part. Menopause. Yeah, menopause is inevitable. It means you cannot escape from there. It happens when women reach around the age of 46 up to about 50. All right, it happens around 46 to up to 50 years old. It starts menopausing. That's when one of the signs is when the period becomes less and less regular. It's no longer regular, or the period becomes less and less. So this happens when ovulation will stop and menstruation will stop naturally. Okay, so the signs here, these are the symptoms. You have hot flushes. That means suddenly you feel very warm. That's what I mean by hot flushes. Okay, mood swings, sometimes happy, sometimes sad. You feel very mangzang, you feel very irritable. All right, fatigue, you have tiredness. Sleep disorders, cannot sleep at night. Yes, and the other effect is osteoporosis. Yeah, this is the what you call the effect of menopause, because when you do not have this estrogen produced, you find that your bone will not be able to retain so much calcium, and that will cause brittleness in the bone, right? The bones become very porous, easily to be broken, or it be shattered or fractured when a woman falls. Okay, let's look at what happens during menopause. Now, why women have menopause is because the estrogen and progesterone will be produced less and less. When a woman becomes older and older, they first of all, this FSH and LH will not be released anymore by your anterior pituitary gland. So when you have less FSH and LH, that means your follicles will not grow. Okay, your follicles do not grow. There will not be eggs produced every month anymore. Okay, so this will also, it causes reduced stimulation of FSH and LH. Yeah, so that's why you don't have the ovaries are not stimulated by your FSH and LH, so that the follicles doesn't grow. Right, follicles do not develop. That means the ovaries will stop producing estrogen. When there's no follicle, there will be no estrogen because the estrogen comes from the follicles. Okay, and then no estrogen, the endometrium lining will not thicken. So there's no more blood lah, right? There's no more blood vessels there. No estrogen, endometrium lining will not thicken. The menstrual cycle stops. There's no more blood. There's no menstruation. And because no eggs, the woman is unable to conceive or bear children anymore. All right, okay. So you will see that what I've mentioned to you is actually quite logically, you can connect everything together. And once you make that connection, you find that it's very easy for you to master this topic. This is one of the difficult ones. I admit, okay, even we have a problem understanding it. But you read it again and again, all right? Look at the diagram, see how they correlate, try to read it again and again and understand and imagine the relationship there. You can explain it. And if this comes out as an essay question, you have all the facts in your fingertips. You can literally score maximum marks with your essay. This is because everything is fixed. It's facts. You can't go wrong. If you have all your facts, you will score fantastically in your biology paper. Yeah, very, very sure. Yeah, just saying very sure. Yes, definitely. You have your facts are there. You can answer K-bar questions. You have your facts there. Everything correlates. You will score. Definitely. All right. So you have to understand first. Okay. Endometrial lining, same as usual. Yes, correct. Endometrial lining is the blood vessels, the lining on the inside of the uterus. Usually, we will use the endometrial, the term there. Use the correct name because you're now in biology form 5. You're not biology KSSM. You're not learning it in science form 1, form 2, form 3. Science form 1, form 2, form 3, you notice you don't use the word endometrium. In form 1 science, you only use the uterus lining or the blood inside the uterus. Okay, so use the correct terms. Estrogen pill, yes, correct. When you have this menopause, so one of the treatment for it is the hormone replacement therapy, HRT. So the doctors will give artificial estrogen for the woman to take it so that the body will not experience so much of this discomfort, okay, that is experienced when you don't have all this estrogen. So you can take hormone replacement therapy, HRT, and they actually doctor prescribe you estrogen, synthetic estrogen pills. Correct, Amiro? Yeah, period. Good word for that there. Good pun there, Amiro. Yeah, okay, right. So this is what I want to to make you understand today. This is my lesson today. I hope you've understood. If you don't, you can watch it again, all right? And you can share my this link to your friends. Make sure they understand. You can actually score very well for this. Okay, so for my next lesson, I hope to see you in my next lesson. So thank you very much for joining my class today. All right, you can look at my previous videos. Also, I've covered quite a lot of topics starting the last few months. So every Saturday at 4 o'clock, I try to have a class so I can keep my channel alive. Hopefully, I can help you at the same time. Okay, so next lesson, I plan to do 15.4, development of the human fetus. So assuming fertilization happen, you're going to have a baby, right? See what's going to happen after that. All right. Okay. So I will see you all next week, hopefully. So please do subscribe if you have not subscribed, so that you can get a notification if I ever have a class. Okay. Thank you very much, students. Thank you, Putri. Thank you, Amiro, Mr. Potato. Oh, sorry, Ex Potato. Okay. Adila. Yeah. And Chu Minyin, Jen Xuan. Everyone. Thank you very much, Amiro. Okay. I think you can then live until 100. Who is that? I don't think that's possible. Yeah. Is reducing the symptoms? Yes, it is not. You cannot you cannot stop menopause. Correct, just wait. You cannot stop menopause. Menopause will be here. It's just that you want to reduce the symptoms. You do not want to feel so, all the irritability. You cannot sleep. You have hot flushes. That can be relieved by having synthetic estrogen. Okay, Chauvelin. Okay, thank you, and I will see you next week. All right. Okay, thank you. Bye bye. Hope to see you. Bye bye.